Sober October, day 27. Codependency. You don't have to drink alcohol to be affected by it. Just care about someone or be in a relationship with someone who abuses alcohol, and you'll experience the relational, emotional, maybe even physical side effects of drinking. The word often used for this is codependency. Codependence is sometimes confused with being obsessed with someone, like infatuated or needy, or you're addicted to someone. But that's not really what codependence is. A codependent is someone affected by someone else's dependence. Co meaning a relationship with a dependent, meaning someone with a dependence problem, an alcoholic or someone with a substance or behavioral addiction. Codependency forms by being in a relationship with someone who has a dependency issue. Think of the spouse or the children of someone with a drinking problem. The spouse loves that person and the children are being cared for by that person. And someone with a drinking problem is either a little or a lot dysfunctional. And dysfunction spreads in families until someone is mature or courageous enough to say enough and set boundaries and heal. Think about this. Most people get married and they have a lot of growing up to do. It's normal. But if one of the people in this relationship has or develops a drinking problem, they not only stay immature and stuck in dysfunctional patterns, their spouse or their girlfriend or their boyfriend or partner or whatever you want to call that relationship, they can start to develop their own dysfunctional patterns and behaviors. Not only that, but kids who are raised by people with addictions also develop similar patterns and ways of dealing with things. Here's the short and possibly oversimplified version of what's going on. If you're in a relationship with someone who has an alcohol or substance abuse or behavioral addiction, that person's behavior will drive people who love them crazy. And the response is to try to do something about it. The problem is that helping someone with an addiction or trying to change their behavior for them is an impossible task. We're not talking about support or care. We're talking about trying to control something you can't control. This is what makes a codependent feel like they're going crazy because they're trying to help someone with an addiction. What happens is that they find themselves resorting to things like control and manipulation, shame, guilt, etc. in order to try to change someone. Now that might make someone who has codependency sound bad or mean or harsh, but that's not what I mean. When you love someone and you see them doing things that hurt themselves or hurt others, it's normal to feel desperate and do whatever you think you have to do to try to change or fix the situation. And that is truly the heart of codependency. Someone ends up becoming obsessed with trying to change someone else. At least this is the predominant issue for most people with codependency. There's a lot of other ways that codependency affects people and harms people, and I'm not going to get into all of them here. But my point is that when you're in a relationship with someone who has a drinking problem, for example, it's going to affect you, and maybe it already has affected you in many ways. During my time in recovery, I've discovered that most people with an addiction are also codependent, meaning before they were an addict, they had a relationship with someone or cared for someone or was cared by someone with an addiction. This is part of how addiction flows through families. A person doesn't just become an alcoholic because their parents were. They were parented by an alcoholic, which leaves them with certain tendencies and survival traits which aren't healthy. Those unhealthy traits can lead right to dependency issues and addiction. It's just very messy, which is why I think the best way to talk about codependency is by talking about the traits, the habits, the fruit of being codependent. I'm going to point to what I think are two great sources of information and help for anyone who thinks they might be struggling with codependency. First is a book called Adult Children of Alcoholics. It was written in 1983 by Dr. Jan, based on her personal experience with alcoholism and its effect on her children, as well as with her work with clients who were raised in dysfunctional families. Jan discovered common characteristics which were prevalent not only in alcoholic families, but also in those who grew up in families where there were other compulsive behaviors. Examples of behaviors include gambling, drug abuse, overeating even. She found that adult children of alcoholics often have these traits. They guess what normal behavior is. They have difficulty following a project through from beginning to end. They lie when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. They judge themselves without mercy. They have difficulty having fun. They take themselves very seriously. They have difficulty with intimate relationships. They overreact to changes over which they have zero control. They constantly seek approval and affirmation. They feel that they're different from other people. They're super responsible or super irresponsible. They're extremely loyal, even in the face of evidence that the loyalty is undeserved. They're impulsive. They tend to lock themselves in a course of action without giving serious consideration to alternative behaviors or possible consequences. They spend an excessive amount of energy cleaning up the mess. Now, just because you grew up in a certain kind of family or you had a relationship with a certain kind of person, it doesn't mean that everything on this list is going to apply to you. However, because the experiences of someone growing up in a family with an alcoholic parent, they have common features. It's likely you will recognize at least a few of the items on Dr. Jan's list. Before Dr. Jan's book was published, an adult child of an alcoholic who went by the name Tony A. published in 1978 what he called the laundry list. It's another list of characteristics that can seem very familiar to those who grow up in dysfunctional homes. According to Tony's list, many adult children of alcoholics can have these 14 traits. They become isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. They become approval seekers, and they lose their identity in the process. They are frightened by angry people and any personal criticism of them. They either become alcoholics, they marry them, or both. Or they find another compulsive personality, such as a workaholic, to fulfill the sick abandonment needs. They live a life from the viewpoint of victims, and they are attracted by that weakness in love and friendship relationships. They have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for them to be concerned with others than themselves. This enables them not to look closely at their own faults. They get guilt feelings when they stand up for themselves instead of giving in to others. They become addicted to excitement. They confuse love and pity and tend to love people who pity and rescue them. They have stuffed their emotions from the traumatic childhood, and they have lost the ability to feel or express those feelings because it hurts too much. They're in denial. They judge themselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. They have dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment or will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings, which they received from living with sick people who were never really emotionally there for them. Alcoholism is a family disease, and they became para-alcoholics and took on the characteristics of that disease even though they did not pick up a drink. They are reactors rather than actors. So that's the list. And just a disclaimer, just because you might express some of these tendencies, it doesn't mean you're a codependent or that someone around you is an addict. There are lots of reasons that we act the way we do. But if you resonate with much of what I just said, you might consider looking into some counseling, especially if you feel like all of this is affecting you in negative ways. There are also 12-step groups for codependency. Almost all addiction groups have a sister group related to codependencies, like Al-Anon for Alcoholics Anonymous, or ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics. So I hope this is helpful and gave you kind of a different perspective on a way we can look at alcohol and how it affects people around us, or how alcohol has affected you from the people around you. So that's it for this episode. As always, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.